Well, today's passage from Mark comes after a passage where Jesus has been hanging out in the mountaintops with his closest friends and decided to name some of them disciples. So he has just returned to town with them. So now we hear that Jesus and his newly named disciples are inundated. They're not able to rest or eat properly. And perhaps rightly so, Jesus' family think he has really lost the plot with being overrun. Out of concern, they want to rescue him, to take him away from those that crowd about and besiege him. As if to confirm their genuine concern, almost immediately we hear that scholars of the religious establishment from Jerusalem, the city where the religious elite reside, those great theologians and thinkers, those respected for their deep learning and erudite scholarship, turn up. They too are seeking to bring reason and reasonableness to this unholy rebel. Rather than validate the draw and gathering power of this itinerant teacher whose power defies the entrapment by convention, they generate a logic that fits their end to shut him down. Such uncontrolled attracting power can reasonably be explained as that of Beelzebul, ruler of the demons, source of chaos and disorder. However, utilizing their very logic, Jesus unstitches their argument. The spirit of that which disrupts and destroys would not generate the gathering of people in hope, the restoration and coming to wholeness of people. Those who deny the source of that which brings life, especially the leaders who should know better, in so doing, they deny for themselves the source of their own life. This Jesus we meet in Mark is a jolly nuisance. He is disruptive and difficult, and he's proposing to unstitch and redefine the boundaries that we're all familiar with about relationships. Boundaries that we need to establish our belonging and our identity. Boundaries are about safety, especially when we're negotiating anything that's different from us. So what Jesus is proposing is genuinely scary stuff. He's proposing the rules that govern and define and structure family and religious alliances and lineages, the very bedrock that we use for our self-identity and understanding, that we use to know who we are with respect to the other, is to be cut away, to be redefined and reformed. If there are no boundaries, then upon what can you depend? How do you know who you are? How do you know where you stand? Jesus is not being reasonable. He is portrayed as being passionately engaged without counting the cost. This sounds rather a lot like madness. And I think that if it was my child, I too would be genuinely concerned. And yet, as we listen to this, we say there is something reasonable about it, do we not? As we listen to this account from Mark, we are influenced to hear it in a particular way because we are aligned with a religious tradition, and we do call this part of our gospel. How many of you are siding with Jesus' family and with the great teachers and thinkers of the religious lineage? And how many of you are siding with Jesus and those who are crowding around? For those who want to join this Jesus tribe, what shows that you belong is how you do the talk of the good news you proclaim. How you do what you say you are. What matters, it would seem, more than affirming creeds or allegiances to religious traditions, doctrine, or dogma, allegiance to familial ties that constrain because you have to behave to belong, even if that constraint is from loving concern. What matters most if you want to be part of this tribe is doing that which brings to life the abundant, transforming presence of God in real time in history. This is not about theory. This is about practice. So who wants to leave now? Choosing to stay and to understand ourselves already a part of a movement in the history of God's transforming presence. The idea that what you do reveals what you believe is rather confronting. How do you know what you reveal by what you do? Do you kind of examine what you do and reflect on it to see what reveals about what you actually are thinking or believing? Or do you proclaim and believe and then pay very, very close attention to every minute detail of what you do to make sure that it has absolute integrity, mindfully and consciously paying attention to everything? Well, you've got to wonder, don't you? If you're so busy self-examining, you haven't got time to live, much less do this abandoned, dangerous, boundary-busting, carelessly extravagant way of Jesus. How do you know? To share with you a third-hand retelling of a story that was told to me. You know, someone tells a story about something they've heard and you tell it again. This chap was going to a meeting that I was at and he'd been listening to a podcast on the way. It's a series of podcasts he enjoys to listen to that comes out of Chicago. Well, it would appear there was a young man in the United States who was a type 1 diabetic. He was in his 20s and he had lapsed into a diabetic coma. He was a young man who lived in denial and defiance of his diabetes, so he ate and he drank and he did all sorts of things with foods that he should not do. So he had lapsed into this coma. After a reasonable period of time, the medical facility where he was being kept alive on life support suggested to him they might like to think about turning it off because there was little hope. His close friends couldn't bear to participate in it because the family did make the decision to do this. Because his friends couldn't bear to participate in it, they all stayed away that week. They went home and they did what young people of their generation do. They went onto his Facebook page and they began to post messages, eulogies, memorials to their dear friend. Well, in the meantime, the family had changed their mind. They didn't switch off the life support, and they moved him to another facility. Within 3 days, the young man regained consciousness. The young man's brother had actually posted the family's decision on the young man's Facebook page, but it didn't get enough likes, so it disappeared off the page, so no one saw it. A week later, the young man posted on Facebook that he was indeed alive. But in the meantime, the young man had had chance to read all the tributes to him. The person his friends described was not the person he saw himself as, was not who he understood himself to be. He had no idea that he was this person that they were talking about. And it provided him with the impetus to change the way he lived, to want to live, and to be the person, to know it in himself that others recognized him to be. The chap that was telling the story is not aligned with Christianity, but he jokingly said, it's kind of a resurrection story, isn't it? It gave him back his life. It is hard to see ourselves as we are, to see the person our doing reveals. We need people, and we need a process that enables us to see the outcome and consequence of our actions and our behaviour. For us to see in ways that we are willing to receive and able to learn from, so we can choose to modify or to adapt or to change, to actually do differently, so be the people we aspire to be. Or we might even be surprised to discover we are the person that we don't think we are, and be empowered to be that more. We need this especially if we are to be people willing to break the bonds of relationship that ensnare, the bonds that prevent the unconventional, justice-bringing, love-insisting life of God into being. I guess we could understand a witnessing community of faith like this as a people in context to help us know. Today, Callum, we are delighted to be welcoming you as part of our community of faith through baptism. I know your journey, Callum, these past few years has not been an easy one, but with your willingness and your quiet tenacity, with the wraparound care and support of a community, a whānau made up of the mission, of us people here, of friends, your story is a story of life and hope. Your story is an inspiration to us of transformation within the everyday, and it shows us of how being and doing with another makes all the difference for life to become.